I want to go over some common issues that might arise when working with Vagrant and VirtualBox. The first issue I want to talk about is antivirus software. Some Windows antivirus software such as Avira, AVG, and others have been known to interfere with the operation of VirtualBox. I've listed some errors on your screen here that can be associated with this type of issue. If you get such an error when starting a virtual machine, try disabling your antivirus software and rebooting your system. Here's a screenshot of one such error. Even if you're using Vagrant to control your virtual machines, it can be helpful to start the VirtualBox application to get a better idea of what is happening with your virtual machines. Again, the workaround for this is to simply disable the antivirus software or switch to another antivirus software that doesn't interfere with VirtualBox. If you happen to have a Mac, you could use it for your coursework, as most of the issues we'll be talking about here are Windows related in some way. Another issue you might encounter is that your virtual machine's virtual network cable may be disconnected on boot. You'll see the message on your screen after you run Vagrant up if that's the case. If you were to open up the VirtualBox application, you would find that the virtual machine is running. Also, if you were to go to the settings of that virtual machine and click on Network and finally click on Advanced, you would see that the checkbox next to Cable Connected is unchecked. We want to make sure that this box is checked, and we can tell Vagrant to do that for us. Here's how. You add an additional stanza to your Vagrant file, which is highlighted on your screen. This tells Vagrant to make sure that the virtual cable is connected for that virtual machine when it is started. Once you've added this additional configuration, you can run Vagrant Reload, which will restart the virtual machine, this time with a network interface enabled. This brings me to another issue I've seen before, and that's not editing the correct Vagrant file. Sometimes we're working with multiple virtual machines and we think we're editing one file when we're actually editing another one. I suggest starting your editor from the command line in the directory that you're running your Vagrant commands in. One editor that I like and recommend is called Atom. It has syntax highlighting, so it makes spotting some typing mistakes easier. Also, it works on Windows, Mac, and Linux. To edit the Vagrant file in your current directory, simply execute atom space Vagrant file with a capital V. Another reason you might see the previous error message about the config.vm.boot_timeout setting is because the virtualization settings for your processor haven't been enabled in your BIOS. You can confirm this by looking at the VirtualBox window for your virtual machine, also known as the GUI or Graphical User Interface. The easiest way to do that is to add the configuration on your screen to the Vagrant file and then run Vagrant Reload. If you see an error in your virtual machine window that says something along the lines of this kernel requires an x86-64 CPU, but only detected an i686 CPU, then you need to enable the virtualization options in your BIOS. This means making sure that you have VTX for Intel processors and AMD V for AMD processors enabled. This varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, so you might have to look up the documentation for your specific computer. Really, one of the most common issues I see when working with configuration files, including the Vagrant file, are simple typing mistakes. A very common one that I see a lot that is specific to Vagrant files is using an equal sign in the config.vm.network line. It looks correct, but it isn't. You see config.vm.box followed by an equal sign. You also see config.vm.hostname followed by an equal sign. And if you continue with that pattern, you'll actually use config.vm.network followed by an equal sign. But that is not the syntax that Vagrant is expecting. The proper syntax is config.vm.network followed by a space. There is no equal sign on that line. If you were to run Vagrant up with this configuration, you'll get an error like the one on your screen. The good news is that the error message tells you what line the problem is on, although it doesn't necessarily point to the proper place in the line. Again, just remove the equal sign, and when you run Vagrant up, you'll be all set. This simple mistake just goes to show you how important it is to pay attention to details. Every little character counts, punctuation and capitalization included. During this course, you will be installing web applications. If you can ping your virtual machine, but you can't get to it from your web browser, it could be a couple of different things. First off, if you're using Microsoft Edge browser, it has some additional security features that prevent you from connecting to a local IP address on your system. So the first thing to do is try a different web browser. I'm a big fan of Google's Chrome browser, but there are other good choices as well, such as Firefox. If you've tried another web browser and still can't connect to the web application, then make sure the web server is running. Look at its status with systemctl is-active httpd or systemctl status httpd. If it's stopped, then start it with sudo systemctl start httpd. Also, make sure to enable it with sudo systemctl enable httpd. If we forgot this step and rebooted our virtual machine, the web server will not start automatically on boot. This is a common reason why the web server isn't running. If the web server is running but you still can't access your application via a web browser, the next thing to check is the error log. Do that by running sudo cat /var/log/httpd/error_log. There is another issue with the web server. You'll almost always be able to determine what it is by looking at the error log file. By the way, if you're ever prompted by Windows with a question like, do you want to allow this app to make changes to your computer? Answer yes. It's either Vagrant or VirtualBox trying to configure your system for you. You might see a message about HashiCorp, which is associated with Vagrant, or Oracle, which is associated with VirtualBox. It's perfectly fine to give those applications the ability to make changes on your system. They're known good applications. They aren't going to infect your system with a virus, for example. There's a chance you'll see something like this the first time you try to configure an IP address on one of your virtual machines, for example. If you don't allow Vagrant and VirtualBox to modify settings on your Windows system, then they aren't going to function properly. If you've tried several troubleshooting steps and nothing seems to work, I would suggest first taking a break and then starting all over. Start over with a fresh directory, then run Vagrant init in that new directory and try again all the way from the beginning of that project. Sometimes when we try a little bit of this and a little bit of that, we can create new issues. So it can be best just to start over again with a clean slate. Finally, I want to leave you with one last troubleshooting step, which is to simply reboot your physical computer and try again. There's a chance that something is not functioning properly that isn't immediately obvious to us. There could be a process or a procedure that is hanging or a duplicate network configuration in use because of all of our troubleshooting steps. When it comes to troubleshooting our local systems, this is a relatively quick and harmless thing to try.